This is
and when you
part
talk
2.
about that specific case that Trump was referencing, that he played the ad of Jocelyn Nagari, which is in Texas. There's something to note here, which is that ad tries to tie this case directly to Kamala Harris and the Biden administration. And the facts of the matter are that those two individuals that are suspected of committing that heinous, awful crime, they were detained and arrested at the U.S.-Mexico border, and then they were released back into the United States, awaiting a court date. That is what happens oftentimes with undocumented immigrants who go to the border and claim things like asylum. They are released in the United States, and then they stay in the United States expecting a court date. Donald Trump has said that Kamala Harris and Joe Biden created that system, but what Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have said, among other things, is that Donald Trump, and let me know when you guys do, that would enforcement at the southern border, but B, tried to quicken that asylum process so that people don't have to be released into the United States and can quickly go through the legally required asylum process to vet their asylum claims. Lindsay.
And Jay, former advisor Steve Bannon was released from prison today, just days before the election, and he's warning that there could be a reprise of 2020. Explain what he's talking about.
Yeah, his words specifically were referring to what he thinks Donald Trump should do again. So Steve Bannon in federal prison for 4 months on contempt of Congress charges for defying a subpoena from the January 6th committee. And when he got out, he went on to his podcast. He mentioned January 6th of this year, talking about potential plans for the election and potential plans to fight results that he would not view as legitimate. And this, of course, would be results that were not favorable to Donald Trump. And then he suggested that Donald Trump should go out as Steve Bannon says, 11 o'clock or so on election night and declare victory essentially no matter what. And it's a common theme we've heard from those in Trump's inner circle of saying that because they are seeing what they view as positive poll numbers and positive early voting numbers, although every single poll shows this race neck and neck, that any result that is not to their liking, in their view, would equal, as a lot of them alleged in 2020, election fraud. And that's why they're pushing Donald Trump, as Bannon is, to declare victory early, Lindsay.
Let's not
vote. And of course, tonight, Harris tried to send a symbolic message by giving her speech where Trump spoke right before the Capitol riot. What were some of the biggest takeaways from her speech tied to January 6th?
It's interesting. She only mentioned January 6th directly once, meaning she only used the term January 6th once. And then she goes on to talk about Trump's attempts to overturn the 2020 election. She said to the American people a version of "this is who Donald Trump is," trying to contrast that with who she says she is and the threat that she says Donald Trump poses to American democracy. Another thing that she mentioned that stuck out to me from our reporting over the last few months,
I want to hear the president talk, not this news. Let me hear it.
And that is true, Lindsay. I can tell you in our reporting over the course of the last few months, I've talked to January 6 defendants and their families who say that either they or their families have heard from Donald Trump directly, or in some cases those in his orbit, and he has promised them a pardon. And some of them tell me they are waiting behind bars right now, convicted on charges related to the Capitol attack, for a pardon from Donald Trump, Lindsay.
And Jay, how do their messages on the economy differ tonight? Trump, of course, still talking about 100%, potentially 200% tariffs on some goods like cars.
And what Harris tried to do is seize on those comments about tariffs, for instance, and try to brand them as a tax hike. We've seen Democrats try to do that in recent days, saying, in a sense, that because Donald Trump wants these tariffs, they will trickle down to the consumer. What Donald Trump has said is because those tariffs would be beneficial to the American economy, that they would ultimately end up benefiting the consumer. That's the difference in economic messaging there, particularly on tariffs. But when you talk about the overall economic messaging, it's just painting two very different pictures of the American economy. What Kamala Harris has said is, look, and as she said tonight, there is work to be done to bring down prices and to address making this a more equal economy for all. But the economy, in Kamala Harris's speech tonight and other things she said on the trail, is by every metric we've seen at ABC News, for instance, solid. There's a solid jobs market. The stock market is up, et cetera, et cetera. What Donald Trump has tried to say is that those positive metrics for the economy they, in his view, are an illusion in that those positive numbers are not trickling down to the consumer. We know, Lindsay, that the economy is the
Guys,
top
I'm
issue
gonna end
for
right
every
here.
single
Make sure you
voter, or
like,
I would say
subscribe,
most
and
voters
comment
we
this
see in the
video.
polls, 80
Please
to
do not
90%
choose
or so,
Trump, I'm
depending
telling
upon
you.
the poll that you're
Please
looking
do
at.
not
So the
choose Trump.
reality is,
Choose
while the
Kamala.
numbers
Well,
may
it's
say
really
one thing,
your
the true
choice, but I'm just
test
telling
of
you.
how
Just warning
Americans
you.
feel about this
Make sure you
economy
like
will
and
largely
subscribe. Bye.
be borne
See
out
you
on
later
Election Day,
then.
November 5th.